Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
I'm so excited to get into this one.
Me too. So I want you to imagine for a moment that your organization is on the brink of absolute, irreversible collapse.
Right, like the literal servers are melting down in the back room.
Exactly. Your fiercest competitors are actively tearing apart your market share. And your team is they're exhausted, backed against a wall, facing total ruin.
It's a complete nightmare scenario.
Right. Now imagine that your lead engineer, the single most talented person in your industry, the only person who can actually salvage the core architecture, is sitting in the break room.
Just hanging out.
Just hanging out. He's perfectly healthy, fully equipped, and completely aware of the disaster that's unfolding, but he refuses to touch a keyboard.
Wow. He just refuses to help.
He refuses. And why? Because during a meeting earlier that month, the CEO publicly slighted him.
Oh, wow. So his feelings were hurt.
Yeah. He didn't get the respect he felt he deserved. So he is actively, intentionally watching the entire enterprise burn to the ground.
Entirely to prove a point about how indispensable he is. That's wild.
It's that specific flavor of toxic, self-destructive, community-shattering ego. And the crazy thing is, it's not a modern corporate invention.
No, not at all. It's actually exactly where we find ourselves today as we plunge into this deep dive of books 15, 16, and 17 of the Iliad.
Our mission here is to act as your guides, helping you extract practical wisdom, moral insight, and real-life application from this incredibly brutal ancient narrative.
Yeah, we're searching for those mechanisms of human behavior that they haven't changed in 3,000 years.
So let's set the stage a bit, because the stakes in this section really provide the perfect pressure cooker for all these behaviors to come out.
Oh, absolutely. The situation for the Greek army right now is practically apocalyptic.
Yeah, they've been pushed back across the plains of Troy, right?
All the way to the edge of the agency. I mean, their backs are quite literally against the wooden hulls of their own ships.
And if those ships burn,
there's no retreat, there's no sailing home. They will just be slaughtered on a foreign beach.
And the Trojan forces, led by Hector, they've completely shattered the Greek defensive wall. They're advancing with a literal fire in their hands.
And Achilles, the Greeks' ultimate weapon, is the guy sitting in the tent, nursing his wounded pride.
Right, entirely consumed by that grievance against his commander, Agamemnon. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because before we deal with the catastrophic psychology of Achilles, we have to look at the people who don't have the luxury of sitting in a tent.
Yeah, the individuals on the front line who are desperately trying to hold reality together.
Exactly. While the universe itself seems actively intent on destroying them, Book 15 opens with this staggering display of uncontrollable forces.
We aren't just dealing with human armies here. We're dealing with a cosmic course correction.
All right, Jupiter, Zeus wakes up on Mount Ida, and he looks down at the battlefield and realizes his wife Juno has totally tricked him.
Yeah, she manipulated circumstances while he was sleeping to let the sea god Neptune help the Greeks.
So Jove realizes the timeline, his decreed fate, has been tampered with, and his reaction is just raw, terrifying authority.
Oh, he doesn't just send a memo. He threatens Juno with physical cosmic violence.
He actually reminds her of that time he hung her from the heavens with anvils on her feet.
Right. It's a stark reminder to the audience that, hey, the universe is not a democracy.
Not at all. So Jove forces Neptune off the board, and then he does something that completely destabilizes the Greek defense.
Yeah, he sends Apollo to revive Hector, who had been severely wounded and knocked out.
But Apollo doesn't just heal him, right? He breathes this terrifying supernatural vitality into him.
The text uses this incredible imagery. It compares the revived Hector to a stabled, pampered horse that suddenly snaps its tethers.
Oh, I love that part. It breaks out of confinement and just gallops violently across the plains.
Exactly. Absolutely intoxicated by its own muscle and power. And Hector hits the Greek lines with that exact kinetic energy.
The panic that ripples through the Greek army is just palpable. They're facing a man essentially possessed by divine adrenaline.
But in the center of all this supernatural onslaught, we find this purely human anchor, Ajax.
Yes, Ajax. The visual poetry Homer uses for him here is basically cinematic.
He isn't using standard infantry tactics anymore. He realizes the conventional rules of engagement have completely failed.
Right, so he's standing on the decks of the burning ships, wielding this massive iron-studded nautical mace.
It's like 20 cubits long. We are talking about 30 feet of solid wood and iron.
And he's leaping from the deck of one ship to another. Homer compares him to a trick rider vaulting between galloping horses.
Ajax is just this moving, screaming tower of pure human defiance, trying to manually block a divinely powered invasion.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But right next to this massive display of brute resilience, we find a totally different kind of warrior.
Yeah, facing a completely different psychological test. Ajax's brother, Teucer.
Right, Teucer is a master archer. While Ajax is swinging this giant mace, Teucer is operating with precision.
He sees Hector tearing through the lines, so he knocks a heavy arrow, draws the bowstring back, and aims directly at Hector's chest.
This is the inflection point of the entire war. I mean, the trajectory of this one arrow could end the conflict.
It could save the ships and send everyone home. He's done the training, he has the skill, the vantage point is perfect.
He executes the mechanics flawlessly. He pulls the string back, the tension peaks, and Jove intervenes.
Yep. Jove has decreed that Hector's fate does not end today.
So the supreme architect of reality just snaps the bowstring. The cord literally breaks mid-draw.
The heavy bow falls uselessly from his hands. The arrow just drops dead into the dust.
And Teucer's reaction is just immediate, absolute despair.
He cries out to Ajax, basically saying, a god is actively sabotaging us. He knocked the bow from my hand.
This moment really requires us to translate that ancient worldview into our modern experience of failure.
Right. The ancient mind externalized catastrophic friction. When a perfect plan failed, they blamed a deity.
Jove literally broke the string. Today, obviously, we rely on different language for that.
We talk about market volatility, algorithmic shifts, supply chain failure.
Black swan events, like a global pandemic,
Exactly. But the psychological impact is identical.
Yeah.
You do everything right. You put in your 10,000 hours.
You aim perfectly. You pull a string on launching your business or closing that big acquisition.
And an entirely external, uncontrollable macroeconomic force just snaps the string. The universe pulls the rug out from under you.
But wait, I want to challenge the takeaway here. Because Ajax's reaction to Teucer's despair is fascinating, but it also seems, incredibly dangerous.
How so?
Well, Teucer is devastated. He basically says the universe cheated. But Ajax doesn't offer any emotional validation at all.
No, none.
He just tells Teucer, since heaven commands it, drop the bow, leave the arrows, grab a heavy shield and a spear, and fight a different way.
He tells him to pivot immediately.
Right. But isn't there a massive, fatal flaw in abandoning your core competency the second you encounter friction?
That's a fair question.
Like, Teucer is a sniper. If you take a highly trained sniper, strip him of his rifle, hand him a sword, and shove him into hand-to-hand combat,
he's almost certainly going to die.
Exactly. Translating that to today, if my software startup's core product has a major server failure, pivoting overnight to manufacturing physical hardware is a recipe for bankruptcy.
Sure.
So when does adaptability just become blind, suicidal panic?
Okay, that is the crucial distinction between encountering friction and experiencing a structural paradigm shift.
Explain that.
Ajax is not telling Teucer to pivot because he missed a shot or because the wind blew his arrow off course. That's friction.
Okay.
A paradigm shift is when the string completely snaps and you have no replacement cord. The tool itself has been entirely negated by reality.
Oh, I see.
If Teucer stays on that deck, holding a piece of useless wood, mourning his lost identity as an archer, he will be killed, either by the fire or by Hector.
So it's about the sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. Continuing a hopeless endeavor simply because of the resources you've already invested in it. Teucer invested his whole identity in that bow.
But Ajax is forcing a rapid cognitive reset.
He's demanding that Teucer accept the brutal new reality. You are no longer an archer. You are a spearman now because that's the only role available to survive the next 5 minutes.
So the mechanism of resilience isn't about blind optimism. It's about the speed of identity detachment.
Yes, instantly detaching from your preferred method of solving the problem.
The practical application for you, the listener, when navigating a crisis, is to audit your tools.
When your primary plan fails due to forces entirely outside your control, how long do you stand there staring at the broken string?
Because the uncontrollable forces of reality are deeply indifferent to the elegance of your strategy.
Absolutely. Character in a crisis is defined by the velocity with which you drop the obsolete tool and pick up the new one, no matter how clumsy you feel using it.
Wow. Okay, so the contrast between this hyper-adaptability on the front lines and the paralyzing rigidity back at the camp, that's what drives the tragedy of Book 16.
Yeah, while Ajax and Teucer are bleeding to protect the perimeter, Achilles is just watching the smoke rise from safety.
He is utterly inflexible. Which brings us to this profound psychological exploration of ego and what the text calls unprofitable bravery.
The transition from the chaotic noise of the battlefield to the tense quiet of Achilles' camp is really jarring.
Book 16 opens with Patroclus, Achilles' deepest companion, returning to the tent in absolute tears.
And Achilles' response is incredibly revealing regarding how toxic his mindset has become.
He looks at his weeping friend and totally condescends to him.
He asks Patroclus why he's crying like a little girl who runs after her mother, begging to be picked up. He weaponizes the vulnerability.
Which is just a classic defense mechanism. Yeah.
Exactly. By mocking Patroclus' grief, Achilles is trying to insulate himself from the moral weight of the situation.
Because if Patroclus is just being childish, Achilles doesn't have to confront the fact that his own inaction is causing all this suffering.
But Patroclus refuses to be shamed into silence. He delivers this brutally precise psychological dissection of Achilles.
He lists all the great Greece champions, Diomedes, Ulysses, Agamemnon, who are all currently lying wounded in the medical tents.
He forces Achilles to look at the cost of his strike. And then he attacks the very core of Achilles' identity.
Because Achilles prides himself on his divine lineage, right, being the son of a sea goddess.
Yeah. But Patroclus strips that away. He says, you weren't born of a tender goddess or a human hero.
He says Achilles was formed from the hard entrails of rugged rocks and raging seas.
Because his mind is untamed and his manners are entirely rough. He calls him a force of unfeeling nature, rather than a human embedded in a community.
And the phrase Patroclus uses that completely anchors this section is unprofitably brave.
Such a powerful phrase. It's a surgical strike on the concept of isolated talent.
He's demanding to know what is the value of your unparalleled strength, your tactical genius, if you intentionally withhold all of it when your community is facing extinction.
But what's truly disturbing is that Achilles is entirely self-aware. He isn't acting out of blind ignorance.
No, he responds by calling himself a tyrant. He explicitly states that the tyrant's pride lies rooted in his breast.
He knows his grievance against Agamemnon has mutated into a toxic obsession. But the dopamine hit of righteous indignation is just so strong.
He can't break his own addiction to the anger.
That cognitive dissonance is the hallmark of unresolved ego. He wants his friends to survive, but he desperately wants the leadership structure to fail.
He wants Agamemnon to fail publicly and catastrophically, just to validate his own worth.
He wants them to realize how desperately they need him, so they arrive at a compromise, but it's ultimately a fatal half measure.
Right. Achilles refuses to take the field himself, but he permits Patroclus to wear his legendary armor.
And he allows Patroclus to lead their elite infantry, the Myrmidons, to push the Trojans back.
But he places this rigid, explicitly selfish boundary on the mission.
He commands Patroclus to extinguish the fire and clear the camp, but strictly forbids him from pursuing the Trojans across the plain.
I have to question the logic of this compromise, though. I mean, if Achilles is so deeply committed to this punitive strike against the king, why intervene at all?
Right. Why not just let the ships burn and sail home?
Exactly. By giving Patroclus the armor, he's stepping back into the fray, but through a proxy.
It feels like he's trying to engineer a highly specific outcome where the Greeks are saved, but only just barely.
And the credit flows directly to his armor. He actually tells Patroclus, "Consult my glory and forbear."
He's terrified that if Patroclus wins a decisive victory, it will dilute Achilles' leverage and diminish his personal brand.
You are identifying the exact mechanics of a toxic, narcissistic leadership maneuver.
Achilles wants the operational success of saving the logistics base, but actively sabotages the strategic victory because it would threaten his ego.
Translating this into modern organizational behavior, it's identical to an executive who delegates a failing project to a highly capable manager,
but intentionally withholds the budget or support required to permanently fix the root issue.
Yes, they give the manager just enough resources to stop the bleeding, but explicitly forbid them from redesigning the system.
Why? Because the executive wants to maintain the narrative that they are the only visionary capable of systemic design. They weaponize their own talent against their own organization.
The practical reflection here for you, the listener, cuts very deep. Where in our own lives are we practicing unprofitable bravery?
Where are we using our intelligence or influence to engineer scenarios that punish people who slighted us?
Even when it causes collateral damage to the larger community.
Yeah.
Are you withholding crucial information in a project just to watch a rival manager struggle?
Or are you giving your partner the silent treatment, watching the household logistics fall apart, just to force them to admit they need you?
Achilles teaches us that handing your armor to a proxy while you sit in the tent, refusing to do the emotional labor of reconciliation, it doesn't solve the crisis.
It merely transfers the lethal risk onto someone who isn't equipped to carry it.
And the transfer of that risk initiates the most profound sociological examination in the entire epic.
Patroclus puts on the armor, he visually becomes Achilles, and the psychological impact on the battlefield is instantaneous.
The Trojan forces see the armor shine and experience a collective panic. They believe the apex predator has returned.
So Patroclus successfully drives them away from the burning ships. And in the chaotic retreat, he isolates the most formidable Trojan ally on the field, Sarpedon, the king of Lycia.
Before Sarpedon engages in what he knows will be brutal combat with his shining figure, he turns to his second-in-command, Glaucus.
And the speech he delivers is, without exaggeration, one of the most vital texts on the philosophy of leadership and privilege ever recorded.
Sarpedon asks Glaucus to deeply analyze their own social standing. He asks, why are we given the seat of honor at the banquets?
Why are our cups always full of the most expensive wine? Why do the citizens look at us like we're divine?
And why do we possess the most fertile, expansive estates of land? He's demanding that they interrogate the justification for their immense wealth and status.
He's articulating the fundamental social contract of hierarchical societies. He recognizes this privilege is not an inherent right.
It's not an arbitrary gift from the universe.
No. He answers his own rhetorical question by stating they receive all this economic and social capital specifically so they can stand in the very front ranks when the spears are thrown.
He tells Glaucus that if they were immortal, if they could live forever without aging or dying, he would never risk his life in the vanguard.
But since mortality is guaranteed, since death will eventually claim them regardless, they must move forward.
They have to justify the meat they eat and the land they own by absorbing the maximum amount of violence on behalf of the people who feed them.
The core wisdom here is the doctrine of noblesse oblige. Privilege demands disproportionate responsibility.
But let me push back on the sustainability of this model. Because isn't this speech just a highly romanticized rationalization for a warrior cult?
How do you mean?
Well, Sarpedon is essentially saying the peasants feed us premium beef so that we will agree to be premium cannon fodder.
Right.
In a modern context, we don't operate this way, or at least we pretend we don't. Does this brutal exchange of luxury for mortality actually translate to anything outside of a Bronze Age battlefield?
It actually translates perfectly to the foundational mechanics of trust in any human organization.
Really?
Yes. Evolutionary psychology suggests that human tribes allow certain individuals to hoard resources and status solely on the condition that those individuals will act as the defensive shield during a crisis.
Ah, okay. So map that onto modern corporate structures.
The breakdown of this contract is the root cause of systemic cynicism today. Think about executive compensation.
The massive salary, the corner office, the stock option.
Exactly. Those are not historical rewards for a good quarter. They are an insurance premium paid by the collective workforce.
The employees grant the CEO those disproportionate privileges with the unspoken agreement that when the market crashes, the CEO takes the hit.
Yes. The modern betrayal of Sarpedon's code is the executive who extracts the premium wine in the best land, but when the spears start flying, they lay off 10,000 workers while securing a golden parachute for themselves.
Sarpedon dictates that you cannot occupy the best seat at the banquet and then hide in the rear echelon during the crisis.
If you accept the privilege, you must accept the peril.
That reframes leadership entirely. It's not about authority, it's about liability. Sarpedon is fully accepting his liability.
But there is a cosmic dilemma layered over this human struggle that is equally fascinating, because Sarpedon is not just a human king.
Right, he's a demigod. He is the mortal son of Jove.
And Jove, sitting on Mount Ida, is watching this combat develop. He knows Patroclus is going to kill his son.
The supreme architect of reality is suddenly paralyzed by the agony of a human parent.
He experiences the ultimate temptation of absolute power. He actually looks at his wife, Juno, and openly debates breaking the structural laws of the universe.
He considers just snatching Sarpedon out of the timeline, pulling him off the battlefield and dropping him safely back in Lycia.
Because he has the mechanical ability to do it, he can cheat death for his child.
But Juno shuts this down with an incredibly harsh reality check.
She asks him what kind of precedent he thinks he's setting. She reminds him that the battlefield is littered with the mortal children of other gods.
Every deity on Olympus has a stake in this war.
She argues that if Jove artificially extends the life of his own son, he will shatter the integrity of the cosmic order.
Every other god will demand the right to pull their kids out of the fire. Fate becomes meaningless, and reality collapses into chaos.
She forces him to recognize that even his authority is bound by structural limits.
And Jove, possessing ultimate power, submits to those limits. The text describes this haunting image. Jove weeps tears of blood that fall upon the earth, mourning his son.
But he restrains his hand. He allows the natural order to proceed, and Sarpedon is killed.
This presents a massive obstacle to growth for modern listeners, though. We are so conditioned to despise fatalism.
Oh, absolutely. We are sold the narrative that with enough wealth, technology, or life hacking, we can circumvent any natural limit. We believe every system can be disrupted.
We want the cheat code. We want Jove to pull Sarpedon out because we want to believe someone will pull us out when things get dire.
Precisely. But the profound comparative insight here aligns perfectly with Stoic philosophy.
Amor fati, right? The love of one's fate.
Yes, and the recognition of universal boundaries. Jove understands that a system without unbreakable rules is not a system at all.
If the rules of mortality and consequence don't apply to the kingdom ceases to exist.
Acknowledging that there are universal laws and consequences that apply to everyone, regardless of power or pedigree, is the beginning of maturity.
Jove cannot hack the system without destroying the system itself. He has to suffer the grief of his limitations.
Which provides a devastating segue into the third part of Book 16. Jove respects his limits, even in agony. But Patroclus
completely ignores his limits entirely.
He is completely intoxicated by victory. He kills Sarpedon in this brutal exchange, and he achieves the objective. The ships are safe.
The Trojans are broken. All he has to do is turn around and march back to Achilles' tent.
But he doesn't. He pushes his troops forward, driving the Trojans across the open plain, slaughtering them as they run.
Pushing all the way to the towering, impregnable walls of Troy itself.
This is the anatomy of a catastrophic psychological phenomenon known as mission creep.
It's the failure to recognize when a localized success has mutated into a strategic overextension.
Homer explicitly states that if Patroclus had observed the strict command of Achilles, he would have escaped the black fate of death.
But that intoxicating cocktail of adrenaline, dopamine, and hubris just overwhelms his rational faculties.
He's wearing the armor of the greatest warrior alive. He just killed the greatest Trojan ally, and his brain simply stops processing risk.
He attempts to scale the walls of Troy 3 separate times. He fully believes he can end a 10-year war in a single afternoon.
But I want to explore the counter-argument here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't this relentless drive exactly how innovation and massive breakthroughs occur? If an entrepreneur or a general only ever hits the safe baseline objective and stops, they never achieve greatness.
That's true.
So why is Homer punishing Patroclus for showing extreme initiative? Isn't pushing past the objective sometimes necessary?
Well, there is a vital distinction between calculated innovation and blind hubris.
Right.
Innovation is pushing the boundaries of your own established competence. Hubris is operating under the delusion that you have no boundaries at all.
Patroclus is not innovating, he is hallucinating.
Exactly. He is wearing borrowed armor, wielding borrowed troops, executing a borrowed strategy, and he mistakes the success of those borrowed elements for his own inherent invincibility.
He forgets that he is not actually Achilles. And the universe, in the form of the god Apollo, steps in to violently correct that delusion.
The sequence of Patroclus' death is one of the most terrifying systematic takedowns in all of literature. Because it isn't a fair fight.
It's a supernatural dismantling.
Apollo descends from the sky, shrouded in a thick mist. He steps up behind Patroclus in the chaos and strikes him squarely on the back of the neck with the flat of his hand.
It's this concussive, staggering blow. Patroclus' eyes literally spin in his head.
And then Apollo systematically strips away the illusion. He knocks the helmet off Achilles' famous helmet, now just rolling in the dust.
He shatters the heavy spear right in Patroclus' hand. He forces the shield to drop. He literally unlaces his breastplate.
Patroclus is left standing on the battlefield, completely dazed, mentally paralyzed, and stripped bare by a god.
This sequence represents the sudden, catastrophic collapse of ego when reality finally catches up to overextension.
The armor, that false sense of security, is violently removed. Patroclus is made utterly vulnerable.
And it takes 3 separate strikes to end his life. After Apollo disarms him, a young, relatively unknown Trojan named Euphorbus steps up and stabs him in the back.
But Euphorbus is so terrified of what he just did that he pulls the spear out and runs away. He refuses to face a disarmed, dying man.
Finally, Hector, seeing Patroclus staggering, steps in and drives his spear through his stomach, delivering the fatal blow.
And Hector, completely misreading the situation, stands over the dying Patroclus and begins to boast.
He taunts him, saying Patroclus thought he'd burn the city, but now the vultures are going to eat him.
But Patroclus, using his last breath, delivers a devastating psychological counterstrike. He strips away every ounce of Hector's perceived glory.
It's a phenomenal assertion of agency in the face of death. Patroclus looks up and essentially says, "Do not confuse your luck with your skill."
Right. He says, "Fate and Apollo overthrew me first. Euphorbus next. The third wean part thy own."
He forces Hector to realize he's merely the third person in line to strike a man already paralyzed by a deity.
And then Patroclus prophesies Hector's own imminent death, assuring him that Achilles is coming. He totally denies Hector the psychological victory.
The practical how-to drawn from this tragedy is the urgent need for you, the listener, to identify your enough.
Yes. When you define an objective, whether it's a quarterly revenue target, a weight loss goal, or a specific outcome in an argument with your spouse, do you have the discipline to stop when you achieve it?
When your partner concedes the point and apologizes, do you accept the victory? Or does the dopamine of being right push you to keep lecturing them?
Until you ruin the reconciliation entirely. Or when your startup hits its valuation, do you stabilize? Or do you over-leverage trying to double it in 6 months and bankrupt the whole enterprise?
Patroclus did not know his enough. He allowed localized success to create strategic blindness, and it cost him his life.
That blindness leads us directly into the grueling aftermath. Book 17 is arguably the most exhausting section of the epic.
It's an extended, sweaty, claustrophobic tug-of-war over Patroclus's dead, naked body.
Hector manages to strip the immortal armor off the corpse and puts it on himself.
But the Greeks form a defensive perimeter around the body, horrified at the thought of it being desecrated or dragged behind a chariot.
The text describes the fighting in these visceral mechanical terms. Both sides lock their shields and push back and forth, dragging the body mere inches in either direction.
Homer actually compares it to couriers stretching a massive bull's hide, pulling it in all directions until it's drenched in sweat and blood. It's a grotesque stalemate.
But right in the middle of this suffocating gore and violence, Homer inserts this incredibly surreal, poignant detail that completely shifts the emotional frequency.
He focuses on Achilles' immortal horses, Xanthus and Balius.
The charioteer is desperately trying to drive them back to camp, but the horses absolutely refuse to move.
They stand frozen on the edge of the battlefield, rigid as stone monuments on a gravestone.
They bow their heads to the dust, their manes fall into the dirt, and they weep big round tears for Patroclus.
The immortal, perfect animals are crying for the death of a flawed human being.
And Jove looks down, and he actually pities them. He laments that he ever gifted immortal creatures to miserable humanity, forcing these perfect animals to share in the self-inflicted sorrow of mortals.
Modern readers often stumble over this detail. It feels like a bizarre dream sequence inserted into a hyper-realistic war documentary.
But we have to understand the psychological architecture of grief being deployed here.
The weeping horses serve a profound philosophical purpose. They represent the natural order itself, mourning the absurdity of human violence.
It's an acknowledgement of collateral damage. Achilles' toxic ego and Patroclus's fatal mission creep didn't just ruin their own lives.
Their actions sent a shockwave of grief through the entire ecosystem.
The tragedy of humanity is that our ambition constantly corrupts the beauty of the world around us.
And the battlefield physically reflects that corruption. To protect the honor of his dead son Sarpedon and to heighten the tragedy of Patroclus's death, Jove alters the weather.
He casts a thick, unnatural, terrifying darkness over the battlefield. A heavy, suffocating fog drops directly onto the soldiers fighting over the body.
They are slipping in blood, exhausted, terrified, and now they cannot even see the man standing next to them.
They don't know if they're stabbing a friend or an enemy.
The Greeks realize the divine forces have completely turned against them. They're losing the body, they're losing the war, and they're dying in the dark.
This is the ultimate manifestation of existential dread. The fog of war is not just a military hazard. It's a metaphor for the darkest moments of human experience.
And this is where we find Ajax once again.
The same Ajax who adapted to the broken bowstring. The same one who leaped between the ships.
He is covered in dust and blood, his mace is heavy, he's surrounded by darkness, and he looks up to the sky.
He offers a prayer, but it is essential to analyze the specific mechanics of what he asks for.
He says, Lord of earth and air, O king, O father, hear my humble prayer, give me to see, and Ajax asks no more.
He continues, if Greece must perish, we thy will obey, but let us perish in the face of day.
Let us perish in the face of day. That phrasing is incredible, but what makes it so striking is what he deliberately omits from the prayer.
Exactly. This is arguably the most powerful distillation of practical wisdom in ancient literature.
Notice what Ajax does not request. He does not ask Jove for a miracle.
He doesn't ask for a sudden surge of strength to defeat Hector.
He doesn't ask for the Trojans to be struck by lightning, and he doesn't ask for the rules of fate to be rewritten to guarantee his survival.
He accepts that he might die. He accepts that the Greeks might lose the war right there in the mud.
He is asking for one thing only: clarity.
He's saying to the universe, if I have to suffer, if I have to lose, do not let me be destroyed by ambiguity.
Let me see the mechanism of my own destruction. Turn on the light so I can face my reality with agency.
The psychological depth of that request is staggering because human beings naturally crave the exact opposite.
When we are plunged into a crisis, when a marriage of 20 years begins to dissolve, or a business faces bankruptcy,
or when a doctor delivers a terrifying diagnosis, our instinct is to seek the comfort of the fog.
we want to live in denial. We pray for magical rescues.
We pray for the test results to miraculously change, or the market to artificially rebound.
We actively avoid looking at the brutal truth because the truth is agonizing.
But Ajax refuses the comfort of denial. He chooses the agonizing truth of the light over the confusing terror of the dark.
The translation for our modern lives is the practice of demanding clarity over comfort. Navigating a crisis requires you to map the terrain accurately.
You cannot navigate a landscape you refuse to look at.
The practice for you is to audit your own prayers, your own desires during a crisis.
Are you desperately hoping for a reality-bending miracle that allows you to avoid pain?
Or are you asking for the mental and emotional clarity to see the situation exactly as it is, no matter how much it hurts?
You can only strategize against a visible enemy. Ajax demands the light because he knows human agency can only function in the presence of truth.
Let's pull the threads of this massive analysis together. We've explored a sequence of intense psychological stress tests.
We began with Teucer's shattered bowstring, learning the vital necessity of rapid identity detachment.
Dropping the useless tool and pivoting instantly when uncontrollable forces destroy our plans.
We analyzed the toxic architecture of Achilles' unresolved ego, the unprofitable bravery that weaponizes talent against one's own community.
Allowing the system to burn simply to validate a personal grievance.
We engaged with Sarpedon's profound articulation of the burden of privilege, the uncomfortable truth that leadership and status are down payments for future risk.
We saw Jove accept the excruciating limitations of his own power to preserve the integrity of the system.
We diagnosed the fatal danger of mission creep in Patroclus, who failed to recognize his enough.
Confusing borrowed momentum for personal invincibility, pushing past his objective into his own destruction.
And finally, we stood with Ajax in the suffocating fog, recognizing the supreme courage required to demand brutal clarity over comforting delusion.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought regarding the armor itself. We noted that after Patroclus died, Hector stripped the immortal armor off the corpse and put it on himself.
The text tells us that for a fleeting moment, the armor molded to him, and the war god Mars filled his soul with terrifying energy.
Hector felt like a god, but Jove looked down at Hector parading in Achilles' gear and pitied him, noting that this spectacular display was just a temporary shell.
He was a blaze of glory that was actively sealing his doom.
Hector thought the armor made him invincible, but in reality, wearing the armor of the apex predator simply marked him as the primary target when the real Achilles eventually returned.
So the question we leave you to mull over in your own life is this: are you wearing someone else's armor right now?
Are you operating in borrowed status, parroting copied ideas, or projecting a persona that fundamentally isn't yours?
You might think that imposter syndrome is just an internal feeling, but Hector shows us the external danger.
When you fight your battles in someone else's suit, you might intimidate the crowd for a moment, but you are ultimately painting a target on your back that you do not have the authentic capacity to defend.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.